Alrighty, so today's topic of discussion is going to be Azure Virtualization. As you can see here, we have all the points that we're going to go ahead and hit for Azure, what it is, what you want to consider when getting started, all the different types of things and variables that you're going to want to make sure that you keep track of, advantages, disadvantages, scalability, and then Epicor Cloud versus Azure. All right, so what is Azure? Azure is a hybrid Microsoft cloud solution designed to give you full access and flexibility to tackle any IT situation that you may have. It can be connected with existing networks and systems. It basically just works as its own remote site. It supports a wide variety of application development. It is fully secure and follows most security standards, and it supports Windows and open source technologies to provide as much flexibility as possible. So when the topic of discussion comes about do you want to migrate to the cloud, there are some things that you want to keep in mind when you're doing this. You're going to want to determine what problem it is that you are trying to solve and what variables are needed for that problem. So what type of hardware you need, do you need, a specific role or function, things like that. Do you want to avoid steep costs related to purchasing new hardware? You can avoid those costs by moving to Azure in the cloud. Do you need high availability? Does your system need to be constantly running as much as possible 24/7? Azure is much more reliable to achieve this goal. Do you need an offsite location for recovery of any kind or disaster recovery, anything like that? Azure is a great place to put those types of things. If you are looking for any of these types of solutions plus more, then you can contact third parties such as Codabears, or you can set up a subscription at Azure and go directly through Microsoft itself for a Azure subscription that will allow you to have an Azure portal. All right, so let's say you've made the decision that you do want to go to the cloud in some case or another. Things that you're going to want to be aware of is one, do you already have Microsoft Office 365 enabled for your business? If you do, then you're already partially on the cloud, so you have some groundwork to work with. A network will be required for Azure. Like I said before, it acts as if it is a remote site, so you're going to need things like a subnet mask, a gateway, IP scope, DHCP range, all that type of stuff. So you are going to need some build up for that. Do you have any remote sites? Are they going to need access to the Azure, the resources that you're putting in Azure as well? You're going to need to have that into consideration. You're also going to want to know what type of firewall you currently have at your primary site and any remote sites that you have and what those capabilities are, because your firewall is going to be the link to Azure. So you want to make sure that you know what your firewalls are capable of. You're also going to want to determine what type of tunnel connection you want to make to Azure, because a tunnel is going to be connecting your primary sites to Azure, and that's going to link the data between the two. Most people will choose IPsec for that particular thing, but there are a couple other options that you might be able to use. You're going to want to know what your ISP pipeline capabilities are for all of your sites. So is it 100 megabit? Is it 1 gigabit? Is it 10 gig? What is your ISP being able to provide you, and what is the maximum they can provide you? Because that is going to play a huge factor in the type of speeds that you're going to be able to get to Azure between your sites and Azure itself. And then you're also going to want to determine if you have any security guidelines such as HIPAA, ITAR, DoD, things like that. Does your company need to follow those guidelines? And if so, you need to choose the appropriate cloud resources that adhere to those security standards. All right, so some advantages to moving to Azure. Azure acts like an independent remote site, which can give you full access to all your network and data. It fully integrates with your already on-prem systems, so you can just link the two up in a sense. Hardware is always going to be on the latest and greatest, so you don't necessarily need to worry about what type of hardware is up in the cloud. They keep everything pretty much up to date, so you don't need to worry about having old hardware in the mix to keep you slow. They will make sure that you have everything you need there, and if something breaks in the cloud, it's on them to fix it, not on you. It adheres to most security standards, as I said before. You simply just need to choose the correct data center that is right for you, that adheres to those standards. You also might need to contact a vendor or talk to your vendor about the .gov site. It's essentially just a different portal, but it has all those security standards in place so that you make sure that your data is nice and protected. Another great thing about Azure is that you can customize it to exactly what you want to limit costs. So you can customize all the boxes, all the sites, all the things that you have to run at specific times if you need to have very specific sets for resources and such to make sure that you are only spending what you need and you don't need to, be overpriced for that. So you can be able to, you can customize the cost that you're using in Azure to an extent. You can also spin up resources within minutes. Spinning up a VM in Azure is actually pretty instantaneous. All you need to do is fill out a couple forms, click on submit, and it's going to generate the resource. And within 5 to 10 minutes, you can boot it up and you have an active working Windows box. You can also host business critical applications for 24/7 and increase maximum uptime. This can be a little bit more difficult to do in an on-prem environment, and Azure is much more designed for that because everything you put in there is considered in a data center. It's not in some server room in the back somewhere. It's actually in a server center somewhere that is being fully maintained at all times. All right, so some challenges to Azure that you do need to consider. The first is that for the Azure portal, it does need to be managed by an IT resource of some kind. Azure can be complex, and so you are going to need some IT source that knows what they're doing to manage this for you. It can be an internal resource, or it can be a third party such as CodaBears. We help many clients with this every single day. So if you need assistance with this or the migration of any kind, we can help you out there. Bandwidth is going to be limited to your ISP pipeline. So if you only have 100 meg upline pipe from your ISP, you might want to consider upgrading that first before making the move to Azure, depending on the type of resources that you are putting up into the cloud. You want to make sure that you get the most out of your pipeline as possible so that the speeds are there so that your users aren't slow to a crawl when they're moving to Azure. You want to make sure that your VPN and tunnel connections are solid, and you will need one for every single site you have. So if you have 4 different sites and they're in different regions and such, you need to make sure that those tunnels are in place to all connect up to Azure. And that can be a little bit complicated to do based on the regions that the sites are in and such and whatnot. So that can be a challenge that you will need to consider when moving to Azure. Another thing to keep in mind too is that when configuring resources, their billing schemes can sometimes be a little bit complicated and complex, and it's not as easy to figure out as you would think. If you have any billing questions whatsoever about Azure, about what pricing would look like or anything like that, be sure that you contact your vendor to make sure that you can iron out those prices before you start spinning up resources. CodaBears can again help with any configuration you may need and pricing some questions as well. All right, so Azure scalability. The thing about Azure is that it is a vastly scalable sandbox that can be set up for any need whatsoever. So a lot of people here are probably saying, you know, Azure might be a good place to put our Epicor or Kinetic instance. But Azure can do much, much, much more than just host your Epicor or Kinetic instance. Things that it can also do are like, do you need a file server with the latest hardware and as much storage as you need for it? You can throw it in Azure. It can provide a backup solution for machine state and some specific file sets, such as SQL. So if you're having issues with SQL backups, for an example, you might be able to use Azure as a solution for that. It has a vast variety of development tools. So if your company itself is like, its main business or its main purpose is to develop in-house applications at your own pace, then you can use vast amounts of Azure tools to be able to do that for you. You can spin up a variety of different virtual machines on the fly as you need. So if you determine that there is a specific test or something that you want to do, you can spin up a machine real quick, perform the test, and then tear it down, and it's gone. And it's as simple as that. So it's very useful for flexibility in that regard. You can host websites and website services using Azure. So you can have external facing portions of it, and you can have users come to your site using Azure Cloud, and you have the capability of the 24/7 high availability support for Azure on that instance. And then there's tons of other features here that are not on this slide that are listed. I could probably talk for hours about the different things that you can potentially do in Azure. Just know that if you have an IT challenge of some kind, Azure most likely has a solution for you. And if there isn't one in place, they're working on it. All right, so one of the common questions that we get asked here at CodaBears is how does Azure compare to Epicor Cloud? So what I've done here is I've gone ahead and I've created this slide to basically list out the basic pros and cons of Azure compared to Epicor Cloud. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go with the pros of both first. So for Azure, it allows you to maintain access to your data at any time. That's a big advantage that Azure has. It gives you full access to SQL data and administration. Upgrading your Kinetic system is at your own pace instead of being on someone else's schedule. So you get to determine how long you test for. You get to determine the exact date you go live to a new version of Kinetic. You get to set all those parameters. Refreshing data is a simple process that you control. So if you have a situation where you want to update a test or a pilot instance of Epicor with your current production data, you can do that on the fly whenever you wish. Servers can be moved back to on-prem or any other location if desired, whenever you want. You just basically migrate it back to on-prem if you desire, if it isn't working out, or whatever yours is. It's a simply flexible step that you can do. You can reverse it easily if you've moved to Azure and you want to move back. And it also maintains the same exact flexibility that you have with Kinetic in an on-prem environment, which is a big plus to the Azure Cloud, or to Azure Cloud. Now, with the pros for Epicor Cloud, there are a few. The first one is that you're always on the latest version of Kinetic, which basically means that you do not need to worry about upgrading your system ever. Epicor support is going to take care of that for you and make sure that you're always on the latest version of Kinetic. Because you are on the latest version of Kinetic, you will always have active customer support from Epicor support for signing up with Epicor Cloud. So that's another plus that you get there. And then the other thing too is it does not require internal or third-party IT support service. Epicor completely supports you when you are on Epicor Cloud. So it can have simple ease of mind there to where you will not need a technical resource in your company to manage Epicor for you. Epicor support will do all that for you. Now, for the cons on the Azure side, there are a few, and those are: management is required to maintain the Azure portal. You are going to need some type of resource of some kind to be able to maintain this and make sure that it is running appropriately for you as your business grows. And then the other one is that bandwidth is going to be limited by your firewall and ISP pipeline capabilities. So if your pipeline is slow, if your firewall can only support a certain upload or a certain download, then that is what you're going to be stuck with when you migrate to the cloud. And you want to make sure that you have those things in mind so that that doesn't become too much of a problem for you in the speed aspect of things. So for Epicor Cloud, there are a few cons. The first one is that Epicor is going to upgrade you to the next version at their pace, not yours. So that basically means that when there is a new version of Kinetic ready to go, they're going to throw it on you. And if they haven't tested it enough, if they find a critical error later on down the road, you are still on that version. And until they roll you back or until they determine what's going on there, you're going to have to deal with the growing pains that involves with that bug. So there's that to consider. The main one here that is a big turnoff for Epicor Cloud is that it limits your access to your data and to SQL to be able to resolve issues with SQL. So in the Epicor Cloud role, Epicor takes full control of SQL for you. So if you have any type of SQL-related problem with the database, Epicor needs to be the ones that fix that for you, and you can't really do it yourself. And that can be a big time consumer because Epicor support can't always dedicate resources in a timely fashion to be able to resolve your problem. It limits the ability to add stored procs to databases. This is related to the limiting your SQL access, essentially. There is a way within Epicor Cloud, I believe, that you can add a stored proc database, but it can be convoluted, and I believe you will need Epicor support assistance to be able to do that. Refreshing a pilot instance or refreshing an instance in general within Epicor Cloud has to be done by Epicor Cloud because you don't have access to SQL in any way, shape, or form, which can cost a fee, and it is done on Epicor's schedule. It takes time for them to schedule that, make sure that it gets done for you. So it's not like something you can just go and do. It's something you are going to have to wait for. If in the event that you want to pivot, if you want to get off of the cloud for Epicor Cloud, it becomes difficult because everything is in Epicor support's court, essentially. So they're going to need to make sure, they're going to need to do this entire process for you, and they can be very slow with getting you off the cloud and back to where you want to be. And then the Epicor Cloud also has the same exact con that Azure has, where bandwidth is going to be limited again by firewall and ISP pipeline capabilities. So regardless of what cloud you're trying to go to, you need to make sure that you have those two variables in mind when you decide to jump to the cloud. This is a great cloud resource to consider when the discussion of moving to cloud arises. Azure allows you to maintain full control of your Kinetic environment from start to finish. You're going to want to be sure that you plan out exactly what you need in Azure to reduce your costs. Azure has a ton of scalability and can be built up at any time, meaning that it can host more than just Kinetic and Epicor if you so desire. And if you are interested in Azure, be sure to go ahead and talk to us at CodaBears or a third-party vendor for more information to get that ball rolling. Are there any questions?
John asked, we are on our parent co's network and Azure instance. We will be having a new MS data center very close to us. Can we specify a data center to use?
Yes. So in Azure, when you're spinning up machines, you can specify by regions, essentially. So one thing is that the data center itself does have to be owned by Microsoft or owned by Azure. So that's the first thing. But they have West Coast, they have East Coast, they have Central, they have a ton of data centers all over the world to support computer systems. So you just need to choose essentially the region that is closest to you, and that should get you going.
Want more Codabears Lunch and Learn? Check out our channel for more videos or contact us on our website for registration information.